Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. An effort to promote and strengthen globalization is the focus of the World Economic Forum's. फिर से क्या? वहाँ से चलाना पड़ेगा मेरे ख्याल से. Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. An effort to promote and strengthen globalization is the focus of the World Economic Forum's 13th annual meeting of the New Champions, which is taking place between July 1st to 3rd in the city of Dalian in northeastern China. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look and analyze the importance of the summer Davos meet. Joining me on the program today are Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry; Anil Trigunayat, former Ambassador; Aman Agarwal, Director, Indian Institute of Finance; and Upendra Das, Head, the Center. फिर से करना है क्या? एक काम करते हैं, मैं अपना इंट्रो दे देता हूँ, guest introduction, and after that we'll take the discussion forward. Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. An effort to promote and strengthen globalization is the focus of the World Economic Forum's 13th annual meeting of the New Champions, which is taking place between July 1st and 3rd in the city of Dalian in northeastern China. Also known as the Summer Davos, the meeting has become synonymous with China being held alternatively on an annual basis in Dalian or Tianjin. It is an effort by the World Economic Forum to promote innovation, science and technology. The theme of the annual meeting of the New Champions 2019 is Leadership 4.0, succeeding in a new era of globalization. It sums up the main focus of the gathering, which will attract more than 1,800 leaders of diverse fields from around the globe. The participants represent politics, business, trade, civil society, academia and media. According to the organizers, 70% of the guests will come from outside China, representing 120 countries, covering more than half of the world. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the importance of the Summer Davos meet. Joining me on the program today are Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry; Anil Trigunayat, former Ambassador; Aman Agarwal, Director, Indian Institute of Finance; and Upendra Das, Head, the Center for Regional Trade. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Dua, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyze and understand what the Summer Davos meet is all about.
As you mentioned in the introduction itself, this is the 13th edition of the so-called Summer Davos, with the main one being held in the month of January at Davos clusters in Switzerland. This is a series which has been emphasizing new champions in the world, who started emerging from what I would say when it was globalization 3.0, and now we are moving on to globalization 4.0. In 3.0, basically it was the emergence of internet in the 90s, which had caused the huge technological disruptions and as well as leading to changes in the world ecosystem. But the way the disruptions are now taking place, it's no longer just internet. We are seeing that technology is changing so fast, and along with technology, we are also seeing geopolitical changes of a very rapid order. I would even say that all these things we need to see in the context of our climate change, environmental issues, plus the fact how inequalities and social discontent also seems to be on the rise. So this 13th meeting is looking at technological disruptions, no doubt, but how it would impact things going forward. That's why it's being called globalization 4.0.
Right.
And this theme was chosen at the at a Davos clusters meeting in January this year, that this is what should be looked at intensely when the summer Davos is held in Dahlia.
Sure. Okay. So taking this forward now, Ambassador, I'd like to bring you into the picture. The theme, succeeding in a new era of globalization 4.0. Let's talk about who is in favor of globalization at this point in time.
Well, this is quite an ironical thing that the leaders who were championing the cause of liberalization and the liberal world economic and trading order are becoming one of the biggest protectionist countries. I am referring to United States. But at the same time, you must have heard about 2016, I think, in Davos, when President Xi took over the mantle for globalization and the liberal world order, and that is the irony of it all. Now, what we are seeing today is that we have to look at it in the Chinese context, because it is being held in China succeedingly. What is most important is China is already a very major leader. It is just, there is a little pause in the China-US trade war, in which, of course, the 5G and the Huawei and all the other major Chinese companies have been the big target of competition. The fact is that China has already taken a huge leap insofar as the Industrial Revolution 4.0 or the artificial intelligence is concerned. We know that they have dedicated almost $150 billion for enhancing this outreach. Now, if you see the four sub-themes of that, out of that, one of them was also sustaining economic leadership. Now, China wants to maintain its economic edge, which is under tremendous pressure at the moment, or under stress due to the current war which is going on. Hopefully, this will subside in due course. But this will, despite the fact that whatever is happening, I think China, as I once in the beginning of this war, I had on your TV channel said that eventually they'll come down to negotiating and come to some place where the Chinese and the Americans will find a way, a modus vivendi. Now, the artificial intelligence is something that is going to guide the future. And therefore, whether it is the self-driving vehicles, whether it is global cybersecurity, and whether it is overall development, and as Mr. Dua said, the climate change, again, in the climate change, India and China are the leaders today who are driving that rather than the United States. So the major international organizations which have been built with great difficulty are under stress at the moment. But at the same time, the countries like India and China have taken the lead in maintaining certain sense of multilateralism in the process and moving forward therewith.
Okay, all right, Aman Agarwal, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So how much of a problem is protectionism in today's world?
You see, the digital space and the evolution of AI and its interplay with the human capabilities, that's one of the key concerns which this summit is actually going to toll on in the next 2 days. It is much beyond protectionism. We have seen the way there has been some roars in the last 2 years with regard to the US and China in terms of trade, so-called trade wars, but there have been outfalls which are beneficial for the country like India and some of the other countries around, and we can see the way reorientation of trade structures is taking place not only in India but in large part of the world, given this kind of a supremacy structures which are being imposed upon by some developed nations. But as I said, the particular summit which we are talking about today is not so much on trade, but it is about the way digital space is being enhanced, and is it really the worth? Is it a risk at us? What is the situation of human capital building? The other component which you're also looking at, apart from the digital space, is the fact how water is going to interplay along with the SDG goals of the UN in terms of structuring of what is going to be the, as Mr. Ajay also talked about, the geopolitical structures which are taking place, and can AI again be used there to actually control or structure and then get a sense of what is happening tomorrow. So in my opinion, it is more to do with AI, and in fact they're linking most of the things with China, like the OBOR structure, the One Belt One Road framework. They are actually linking. There is a full 2 sessions which are being organized in the next 2 days on that framework. So they are actually interplaying those frameworks, and it is, if you look at the past summer summits which they have held, it has been tapered towards China and the way China plays a role in terms of the World Economic Framework and the economic structure in this zone than just the total world. I fortunately had the occasion to visit one of the World Economic Forums in Switzerland, and I could see the way divergence of groups was there, but looking at how do we grow business together with government and the industry coming together. And this is something which the World Economic Forums brings at a platform for most industries, and that's where when AI is being talked about, and if you remember recently when the UK had developed certain AI technology for defense, but they were not really keen on putting those defense structures up because they were not sure if they will actually end up creating more worse scenarios or better scenarios based on the decisions which they take based on algorithms. Now this is something which is a key concern area, and there are large number of scientific groups which are working around the world. How is this digital things moving into the human capable structure impacting the human capital? So it is not only a question of technology or AI or structures like that, but also how are we looking at human capital and the geopolitical structures going forward when it comes to business, when it comes to government and governance.
Okay, Upendra Das, you know, are we witnessing a new era in globalization, and that's why these countries are coming together to try and factor that in?
To a large extent, yes. But I would also like to envision a world where the champions of the erstwhile globalization and liberalization era would also once again provide impetus to the same global forces. And if US-China trade war pause in Buenos Aires last year at the G20 and continuation of that in the recently held in Osaka G20 summit are any indications, it only suggests that 2 of the major economies, one which was turning protectionist and the other who has been championing globalization, both sides along with other countries like India and Western Europe and Eurasia, they all are going to speak and work for the same cause, because there is no isolation of any country possible in this new era. So yes, it is going to be a new era, but I have a feeling that those who have actually stepped back from the era of globalization are understanding, number one, that this is not actually helping them achieving the objectives with which they began to become protectionists on the one hand. On the other hand, it is the other countries who are actually gaining from the trade war. And this is something very interesting, and therefore this means essentially that greater interactions across countries and contributing to the flows of goods, services, capital, people and technology in a manner which actually brings the inequalities across these flows and economies and bridges the gap between developed and developing countries is going to be a worthwhile objective in this new era, and I think everybody would participate.
All right. That having been said, Mr. Dua, what does the future look like for the global economy, and what does it mean for global trade?
Let me just, there's a white paper which has been circulated for the participants. It's a very well documented paper which tries to address the objective of this conference. There, the point, just I'll refer to one or 2 points. One, it says it is technology which disrupts trade more than tariff, not protectionism, which we are talking so much. And in 3D printing is making reshoring a reality, and blockchain, the point which you referred about, the blockchain technology is enabling the flows of goods and services, and what is needed is agility in governance to be able to deal with all such changes. And in this context, it says and observes that there is growing multipolarity of international relations. It's no longer, Cold War, one bloc versus the other. There are many multipolar centers of importance, and there is pluralization of the world economy. It's no longer one country dominating. Asia, for instance, all of us are a part of that chain. So the trajectory of globalization, according to this background paper, will depend upon how well governance at various levels, governmental, corporate, international, adopts to these changes. And there is need, and this is the need to preserve what started during, say, industrialization 2.0, that is creating international bodies which will set the norms for rule of law, whether it's in trade, whether it is in other matters. How do we preserve and reinforce them rather than merely destroying them, which one country seems to be trying, but I would say at the end of the day, that country would become irrelevant rather than the rest of the world, because everybody else realizes that onslaught of technology is inevitable.
Sure.
That we need to change all the other things around it, which the background paper also talks about, and I just read out. And in that context, I am very optimistic that the world is moving in the right direction. But while you are doing this, please address the issues which are arising alongside, which are the systems of we've talked about, say, the centers of power, etc. in the world, the huge cost which, if we do not address issues of environment, climate change, an estimate circulated here is that the cost of it is $730 trillion if you do not address over time these issues, and that social discontent which is resulting from all these technological changes, whether it was in 2.0, 3.0, or even have the potential here, could kind of start a social discontent, which could be humongous.
Okay, all right. Taking the points that Mr. Dua made forward, Anil Trigunayat, I'm going to come to you now. As far as realignment is concerned, are we looking at a shift as far as the world trade order is concerned?
Well, it's very interesting now. The problem is that there is one country, that is the United States, which has, especially under the current administration, does not seem to have any regard for the international treaty, whether it is WTO, whether it is United Nations, or whether it is climate change agreement. I mean, you have seen at the G20 also, they refused to sign that particular treaty relating to the climate change. And therefore, the countries that have been one of the largest polluters, fortunately China has been one of the biggest polluters also, but it is on the right side of the history. And it wants to take forward through technology and other means. And today, it has become a leader in the technology. I mean, this is going to be, if you come to think of it today, look at the China, the way they are conducting, they have started much before, and today they have cutting edge technologies, and they are developing all these $2 billion worth AI driven technological park in Beijing. And they are also, I mean, they have taken the lead, whether it was in the optical fiber content, 500,000 kilometers of cables, undersea cables they have laid. Now they have that kind of an edge. and they want to maintain their supremacy in this particular thing as far as China is concerned. Now, until recently, India used to be the soft ware of the world, and China used to be the hardware, but China has been catching up very fast, and they want to be really the leader in the artificial intelligence. Now, as was mentioned by one of the panelists earlier, that whether the powers that earlier drove this liberalization are going to allow even this particular domain leadership to continue will have to be seen, and therefore it is going to be quite challenging. And as it is, the nature of the world is going to be entirely different than what we have witnessed in the recent past. It's going to be very much like that, the Star Wars type of situation, where we would see the technology playing a much greater role in not only in our day-to-day lives, more robotic technologies or robotic workplaces, and that it is going to have its own impact all on the social order as well as on our environment and other things.
Interesting, very interesting there. But
I'll just add one observation. At the G20, which was referred to by...
I was just going to come to that, yeah.
The country which doesn't want to go by international norms, established UN institutions, Bretton Woods institutions, etc., found itself that the 19 other countries, plus the invitees, they all almost passed a resolution. They discussed multilateralism is the way forward, and made the so-called the largest country virtually isolated, except formally passing the resolutions, whether it was in the trilaterals, India, Russia, China, we did that, whether it was in the BRICS, we did that, and the 4 meetings of the G20, formal meetings, they all went ahead with saying the way forward is multilateralism and the rule of law, international rule of law, not shrinking away the arrangements which have been made.
Sure. So that having been said, Aman Agarwal, what would the organizers and the participants like to achieve from the Summer Davos 2019?
No, it's very interesting when you mention this coming from G20 and now the W Economic Forum. I'd like to take you back in the last 1 month what's been happening in India after this government has come in. And there are certain key areas which has been focused upon. In fact, actually they're there also as the key areas for this forum. One in specific is the poverty alleviation. It is ultimately the downtrodden and the poorest of the poor which get impacted. So they are actually looking at technology, how can they actually bring about that equity, framework, responsibility and stuff like that. The other thing which they're looking at per se is the job and the employability. There is no country in the world which is not surfaced with this problem. Certainly that creates AI and other digital frameworks, create new jobs, but then they take away certain kind of jobs as well, and transition from one job to the other is not so simple. So large number of economies are perplexed with this problem of how do you go about. So like in China, in this particular summit itself, they talk about the OBOR, which have been an initiative for the good 7, 8, 10 years now, and they want to push it again. Similarly, they talk about the other frameworks, technological framework, which will actually help boost and reorient the whole framework. The third is water and others. So there is a combination of actually looking at resolving problems which are surfacing before the world. It is not something which is only a question of trade. It is much beyond trade which they are talking about. As I said before, it is actually developing that human capital and creating that human capital where they are trying to develop appropriate balance between artificial intelligence and the society. A framework which should not be disturbed. If it is disturbed, because ultimately whatever we do means something when it is a question of happiness at the ends of the faces of people at large, whether it is government, governance, business, whatever we want to do, it is actually for the people at large. If they do not feel happy, they do not feel uplifted, their standard of livings don't go up, they don't flourish, no business, no technology, no meat has any relevance. And this is something, in my opinion, is the what they're talking of the way forward, intermingling with the SDGs, with technology and the AI, and looking at everything is now being coined to 4.0, whether it is, globalization or technology, lots of things are being, but the issue is here is that we wanting to see the interplay between the humans and the others, and how does it benefit ultimately. It is never in silos now. Earlier when we saw development, it was silos, technology, everything technology driven. When we talked of industrialization, everything was industrialization driven. So whether we want to do trade, whether we want to do business, overseas trade, it was all industrialization. When it was technology, everything was bringing on platforms. Now it is not that. It is actually taking a step back and looking where can we actually benefit the largest?
Right.
By keeping an equity and shake hand between each other and not looking at a supremacy between each other, but more of a shake hand. And that's where we saw the Ajay group, which was there in the G20, which the Pradhan Mantri Modi talked about in the last summit. Then the BRICS came in, then the RIC is there. So there are these groups which are being created, which will help enforce in a different divergent manner to bring in different divergent groups of powers, having someone having knowledge base, someone having capital power, someone having defense power, to come at a common platform and actually bring something on surface for the people at large, in my opinion. And that's where the center focuses people and not anything else.
Sure. Now, Upendra Das, now how much of an impact and to what extent has the trade war between the US and China had on the global economy?
Well, it did have some impact in terms of restructuring of trade. There are trends that suggest that despite tariff imposition, some amount of trade on the same products actually continued from China to US, because they were in any case required, and that's why imports were taking place earlier. The second restructuring was, for instance, in the realm of, say, soybean. The US farmers sold at a cheaper price those soybean to Brazil, and Brazil was one of the largest exporters to China. They exported that, so the prices did not crash in US because the farmers actually could export to Brazil. Brazil could sell at a lower price, and they made profit, and China in the end, actually benefited out of it because they got the soybean at a lower price than they would have imported from the US. So the US farmers, Brazil, China, everybody gained from that restructuring of trade. So, I mean, I do not have any exact numbers as of now, but it is roughly estimated that to the tune of $200 billion restructuring has taken place during this period. The numbers may vary according to different estimates, but the fact remains that the basic objectives of US to protect jobs and therefore become protectionist has been understood not to be done the way it was done, because if they do not import from China, then the domestic economic activity in China goes down, and Chinese exports were dependent on imports from Southeast Asia, Taiwan, and so many countries in terms of part of regional value chains. So they would not import from them, and therefore domestic economic activity in those countries will go down. And once that happens, then their capacity to import from US will go down, and therefore domestic economic activity in US will go down, and therefore employment in US will eventually go down. So this cycle, this global interdependence via trade and FDI and technology and people has been understood, and therefore I think US and China are in the fitness of thing, have put a pause to this and also understood that this is going to gain others perhaps much more than what they are trying to do, and therefore I would like to understand the impact, the question which is very important that you asked, not in quantitative terms, but in terms of the impact in terms of idea. The very idea of today to isolate any country by raising your trade and other economic barriers is not an idea of today.
Sure.
It's an idea maybe 30, 40 years back. We have to look forward. The world has changed and it is going to change much more, and that is that idea that should catch our imagination.
Absolutely. Quick closing comments from all my guests now. I've got 2 minutes left of the program, so in 30 seconds each, the best way forward and what is it that India needs to look forward to really? Starting first with you, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat.
Well, I think that India has already begun the journey towards preparation in the artificial intelligence, and we would not like to miss out this bus, particularly of the IT-driven. And in the digitization era, I find that India is going to be one of the top leaders with China or in the US, I think, in that bracket, which several of our, whether it was innovation or innovation, as they say, or the unicorns are concerned, I think, but we need to continue and provide a little more focus and impetus on working on this artificial intelligence,
Sure.
lest we are
Okay.
left behind, because other countries are doing their best. And there is going to be some kind of a technological warfare, which I can think
Okay.
about. But in that, India is rather placed well.
Okay, Mr. Dua, where does India fit in the new era of globalization?
I think we are heading towards it, and I would look at emphasizing our startup culture as the way forward, because most technological innovations come from the startups rather than the ones who are established in a particular mode of doing work. Let's keep emphasizing them, let's keep facilitating them, and get our barriers to their innovative abilities, capabilities removed so that they can flourish.
Right? Aman Agarwal, is this an opportunity for India, the present scenario?
No, I think it is very much an opportunity which India is actually geared up and is getting onto. I think the focus will be on harmony and peace and keeping people at the center focus with children, the elderly and the future in mind. Keeping a good match of the long-term curves and the short-term curves to go hand in hand so that we can attain the prosperity and growth not only for this nation but for people around the globe.
Okay, closing concluding remark from you, Upendra Das, on what should be wary of going forward.
We should be wary of swinging to any one extreme. We should not give market too much of importance vis-a-vis government. We should not give too much of government and ignore the market. We should have a balanced approach vis-a-vis private and public, capital and labor. And in terms of international context, I read somewhere India should play its part at the global scenario, global economic space much more. The people want it, the government wants it. The way to do it, as I read it somewhere, engage with everyone, align with none.
Okay, all right, interesting. Engage with everyone, align with none is what you're suggesting, and be proactive on the international scenario as well as what the panelists are suggesting. Don't align yourself with any one particular party or grouping. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.